I'm Carol Minkidi, and my husband passed away a couple of years ago, and our family, he had bought this store, and our family is taking on the responsibility of this wonderful place. We consider it really sacred, so we're not going to let it disappear ever, you know. And we have James, who's our wonderful manager. But I also want to tell you that Louisa Solano, who owned the store for 35 years and really built it up as a poetry store, she was actually a student at Lynn and Matin, and she would come in and help Gordon, who owned the store before her, but he wasn't into this poetry as much as she was. Even poets would come in here. But she was amazing to have carried on this store by herself for all this time and built it up and built it up. So she died just a couple of days ago. So but we're having a little thing on Wednesday from 6 to 8 where people can come in and just talk about her and how they remember her and things like that. So you're welcome to come. So enjoy this wonderful reading.
So we have a special guest reader. We're keeping it a family today. Everyone here is related to each other. So I'm Lynn Shu. This is our daughter Lorca. This is Isa and Dad Josh. And we're going to open with a couple of poems by Isa that she wrote today. So I don't know what they are. I'm very excited to hear these poems, Isa.
Yeah, one of these you just wrote probably 15 minutes ago, and the other you wrote last week, but you edited it, the part that you changed it. Okay, do you understand?
Night poems by Isa Shu Edwards. In the cool flowers bloom, the ferocious tigers growl in the deep depths, in the depths of the forest. The tiger's eyes glow like a lantern. That awful night, a lantern glows. Wolves howl at the moon. The once blooming flowers close their petals gracefully.
Thank you. I want to thank you, Carol and James, and I think it's Elizabeth. Thank you so much. Thank you all for having us here. I have the honor of introducing Joshua Edwards. I don't really know how to do it because I feel like I just know too much. What are the sort of the things you need to know about Joshua Edwards? Well, he is a poet. He is also an avid walker. He walked across Texas, and one of the books is called Photographs Taken 1 Hour Intervals. Walk from, anyway, it's very long.
Your title is equally as impossible.
It's true, it's fine. But I don't even, well, Josh is, I mean, I love Josh, so it's really hard. He's very special to me, and I feel like the world shows itself to Josh in ways that I don't understand, so it's kind of amazing to get a glimpse of that world that I can't see, that you will also see, I mean, in part in his poems, so I should just let you read some.
Great. Thank you, Lynn, for that very
Rambling
moving
introduction.
Yeah, and it's so nice to be able to read in this space, which I love, which I've visited many times over the years. confused. So yeah, I'll read first. I'm going to read first from this new book, which is called The Double Lamp of Solitude. And yeah, it's a book of, it has some prose about three poets, Friedrich Hölderlin, and then Federico Garcia Lorca and Miguel Hernandez. And Lynn, I think, mentioned the walking because we went and we stayed in Germany and did a walk. I did a walk from the birthplace to the death site of these three poets. So Hölderlin, and then we went to Spain, or vice versa. We went to Spain and did Lorca and Miguel Hernandez, and then Hölderlin. So that's kind of a big chunk of the book, and it has a few poems of theirs which I translated, and then it has a series of these poems that are all inspired by the Seven Lamps of Architecture by John Ruskin, and so they all have lamp in the title. So I'll read a couple of these first. The lamp of sunrise. At that moment of the night when the body and the sun can get no farther apart, the idea of dawn advances like a peach rolls slowly down an orchard hill. It brushes up against one's dreams. Going only off yesterday's design, morning's building begins with a horizontal measure, the distance between heaven and the lines in the palm of a hand. Its audience is fishermen heading out to sea, sex workers returning home, teachers on their way to school, and many who clean, who cook, who serve. Young lovers hardly notice it. Warm in winter, cold in summer, dawn brushes up against one's dreams until finally it breaks them, falling on the dark's final words to flood the sky with promising light that suggests anything can happen, no matter what the plan. This is called the Lamp of Style. If anyone's read Raymond Queneau's, not Elements of Style, the other one. Anyways, this is based on the story which Queneau tells over and over in this book using different stylistic maneuvering. So this is my house style applied to that story. At noon, it was exactly noon, rush hour, and I was on a bus traveling along the S route with a multitude of strangers, when a man younger than me and with a longer neck confronted another passenger, saying that they had repeatedly bumped into him. The accuser's heart was darkened by anger. His eyes were embers set deep in the shade of a felt hat, held in place by a cord. The accused met his gaze with a terribly icy stare, which did indeed push the aggrieved headlong into an empty seat. City living is no picnic, I thought. To live is to suffer. Later that day, at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, I again saw a man in a hat. A friend of his was condemning his coat for being less than well buttoned. "Hey," I yelled, "life is wonderful." The Lamp of Drama. Out of the solar myth, the play emerged about a holy place where the shadow of a temple was cast across adjacent graves for just one autumn hour to give two phantoms a brief reunion. Staged mainly for nobility at first, it later came to be allegory for social themes. The lovers took 3 centuries to change their clothes. With time, the robes they wore as gentry would be rags. What was said and how it was said also changed as the years went by, as the rules of society were transformed into suggestions, and meanings once held in gesture became the property of speech. Always the audience remained hungry for, more than anything, the sound of that couple talking beyond worldly recognition. It really didn't matter what they said, as long as they were dead. The Lamp of Juxtaposition. And this is an advertisement for the Hungarian pastry shop in our neighborhood in New York, which is probably the best place to write in the city, because they let you just stay there all day long and write if you want. Drinking their 5th cup of coffee, someone sits alone studying an Italian dictionary, while at the neighboring table 5 people laugh at a joke about Rome. Behind them, standing by the espresso machine, a woman in a jersey reaches out to touch a man's face and her elbow brushes against 6 pink roses in a glass vase. On a nearby table, someone left a cup of water and a sugar jar. Across the room, a married couple sits quietly facing each other. One is reading the introduction to Keith Waldrop's translation of Paris Spleen, and the other writes a little poem called Observations in a Cafe. Okay, this is the double lamp of poetry. So all these poems are 24 lines long, and most of them have an 8-syllable line, but some of them are a little bit different, and this one's twice as long. So. I think of my life as a skeleton, and modern times as a funeral, I wrote. I belong to the future. Comparing myself to the green sea, to the sun, to the sky, I made imprecise claims about my birth, singing, sailing, and gliding on beauty. Sometimes I referred to my soul as the third person, imagining it in stone, devoted to a life of posterity and the idea of the future, watching the passing waves of humanity outlasting the world. I restated lines as if they hovered in the air and echoed more subtle thinkers, such as George Echappar-Rule's Herbert. I foolishly used books, like a drunk uses a lamppost, for support rather than illumination, to quote Andrew Lang. Was this how I distinguished allegiances from the ideologies I consumed? Burn the fucking thing down, I shout, pointing an ice cream cone at the dark clouds like a torch. Reading a poem may be a kind of confession. I as another at an arm's length away, somebody who made sitting alone their personality. What convinced me to live this way? Which love? Did I blame music or parents? I aspired to use letters to create a better world, and some said that I only made a fool of myself. Did illness convince me to take long walks or spend years studying the subtle spacing between words? When I worked in the woods, did I while away hours atop boulders by the Ohanapakash River, reading Leaves of Grass, like a numbskull, converting an acolyte's dull year of Sundays into a tragic religious text? Let's travel together into the desert, ourselves, dear friends, and look for places where we can sleep. Someday, we'll all be calm and happy and free. This is the Lamp of the Moon. Lynn did say this, and I know she doesn't like this poem because it has something that she said, but I thought it was funny. The world sucks. Let's drink some wine and look at the moon. She summarizes her favorite classical Greek and Chinese poems as they sit together laughing, sharing a can of sour grapes beneath a waning moon, November 24th, 2018. The moon sometimes seems to be like a line break for a night walk. You look comfortably up at it from a dark path, and when your gaze returns, everything is darker. The world sucks, so they drink wine and look at the moon. It's perfectly lit alone as it moves the sea. I'll read one last one, please. Okay, so this is the Lamp of Sunset. Daytime dies so beautifully, light lowering into the ground, appearing to take with it all of life's quotidian failures, provoking with a glowing orb one's sense of possibility. If only days were self-contained instead of incessantly overshadowing, encroaching, bleeding, looming, and inclining. Time could be always flowering. Sunset is not for everyone. Like a poem with false endings, it coaxes those with parasols to trespass on the fishing piers, convinces mountain wanderers that beauty is the same as truth, makes surfers forego final waves, and corpses poke their heads up through dirt to gaze west from their graves. Cold in winter, warm in summer, dusk brushes up against one's life. More and more, as time advances, it cycles through all sorts of light. There are a couple of other translations in here, and I'll just read one, which is a great poem by Gerard de Nerval, which I translated as Waking Up in a Stagecoach. This is what they saw, trees along the way, in chaos, like an army in retreat. And beneath me, as if moved by strong winds, the ground churning and rushing dirt, the ground churning with rushing dirt and stones. Steeples rising up from verdant fields seemed to guide hamlets with plaster houses clad in tile, which meandered along like flocks of white sheep, a red mark on each one's back. And the drunk mountains staggered, the river a boa constrictor, stretching across the whole valley, springing out to squeeze them. I was in the coach, just barely awake. So I think now Lynn is going to read some poems with Isa maybe by our friend Lao Yang, whose book we translated. It's called P Poems. And Yang is a very dear friend. We were together at an artist residency in Germany, and he spent a couple months at our house while we were gone, and so it was especially wonderful to be able to translate some poems that were written in our space in which he's experiencing things that we experience daily, like a train going by, certain noises and interactions. And it was also a really difficult book to translate, not just because of the way that he uses the language, Chinese, but also because he was in prison for 2 years. And so almost the entire time we were translating the book, we had started it and he wasn't in prison yet, and then he was imprisoned, and so we were like, oh, well, we better hurry up and try to finish this. But he was released in December, and then the book just came out. So he's a really wonderful person, artist, sound poet, kind of cultural provocateur, and so I'll go ahead and also introduce Lynn, and then I'm going to take the baby and go outside. Lynn Shu was born in Shanghai.
You're going to read the back of the book.
She's the author of Debts and Lessons, and with Joshua Edwards, co-translator of Lao Yang's poems. I mean, Lynn is amazing. She's my favorite poet. She has a new book. So it's been just wonderful to watch her write this book, and especially gratifying to be able to get back out in the world after these past couple years and to hear her perform. She's also one of the editors of Canarium Books, which has some books here in the store, and teaches at Columbia University and has raised these 2 awesome kids. And there's like so many things I would really be here for a long time. So I would like to introduce Lynn Shu.
Thank you, Josh, and thank you all for being here. I just, again, love this space so much. I'm going to read from P Poems, which Josh and I, it's okay, I will sit down, don't worry. I'll sit down. And maybe, do you want to just help me with the one that we did before? So the last one, you'll help me, okay? 因为环有胃痉挛、肾焦路和脑无力，我写了几首撒尿诗。别叫我诗人，请叫我撒尿人，像含着一颗热汤的撒尿牛丸那样，在口中急急回动，嘘嘘呼出撒尿人。Suffering from stomach cramps, kidney problems, and muddled thinking, I wrote some P poems. Don't call me a poet, call me a piss person, like a juicy meatball bursting suddenly in the mouth and spilling out. Piss person. "泪水化作尿液，浇灌出诗，撒尿诗。Tears become urine and irrigate the field of poetry. Hashtag P poem." 当自由哭泪的权利也被剥夺，尿失禁就成为所剩无多的自由之一。目睹了掌权者在人民的眼眶里砌墙之后 我重新发明了撒尿。When even the right to cry is denied, incontinence is one of the few remaining liberties. Seeing rulers raise walls in the eyes of the people, I reinvent the act of pissing. 河床挽留了石头，揪住了河。The riverbed detains the stone, expels the river. 钟安静了下来。The clock is silenced. 时间开始了。Time begins. 所有的泪水涌向海。All tears flow to the sea. 海挤满了盐。The sea fills with salt. 岛 island. 小路 mainland, small land, 浮水 floating. 河流入耳 a river enters an ear. 洪水翻起了河床 the riverbed churns in the flood. 尘埃都落了喘气 dirt gasps for air. 每一个人生活在自己亲手而挖的前景里。Each person lives inside the hole they dig for themselves. 每一句真话 a single spoken truth 都能轻易地打折历史的一条腿 can easily hobble history. 然而所有更多的人 but always someone's fresh bullshit 被废话的语法向历史插上一脚 gives history a new leg to stand on. 宇宙是一锅丸子汤 The universe is a pot of dumpling soup. 人根本谈不上肉馅儿 The humans are not even worth mentioning as filling. 人 person 人从众 one of many 众从人 many of one. 天空是石头海 the sky a sea of stone 海是石头 the sea is stone. 诗 poetry 盐存土 shallow dirt speak 岩寺 temple speak. So these are a combination of sort of fragments and aphorisms, and there are moments which they sort of like arrive at a kind of longer meditation, and this is a long one. 一旦上路，路就再也看不到尽头。死也不是进展，而只不过是一枚苍茶，绝强的人形路标。路在大地上颠簸伸展，犹如牧童手里散漫的鞭子，抽打着草木、虚空以及虚空中飘荡的灵魂，势必是良强的，应变不受阻于脚下呲牙般的铲屎，也难免失足于灵魂的坑洼。路拉扯着脚，脚拍打着路，渐行渐远，渐见不见。Once on the road, the end of the road cannot be seen, nor is death an end. It's just a sudden road sign in human shape. The road waves and winds across the earth like an unruly whip in a young shepherd's hand, lashing the grass and the void, and the soul that lingers in the void. Stumbling is inevitable. Even if the chasm doesn't get a hold of you, it's hard to avoid losing your footing in the pit of the soul. The road drags the foot smacks the road, they drift apart and gradually fade. Okay, and this last one you're going to help me with, right? Okay. 在地下，蛇鼠。我拜托街上的猫，喘着气回到洞口，忘了扭亮电灯。我摸着黑走向深处的床，我摸着黑走着， 突然，它咬住了我的嘴，它咬住了我的嘴，它咬住了我的嘴。我忍着痛，挣扎着后退。我感到痛，感到后悔。就在光亮出现的那刹那，我笑了。他看着我，看见他吐出了我的骨头，阴险地走掉。我一一捡回我自己。
Underground snake run. I escaped from a cat in the street. I return out of breath to the mouth of the cave. I completely forget to turn on the light. I grope in the dark for the bed in the depths. I grope in the dark going forth. Then suddenly it bites me on the mouth. I'm bitten on the mouth. On my mouth. It has bitten me on the mouth. I stagger back in pain, full of hurt and regret. I laugh just as a light turns on. I laugh, seeing my bones spit out. I sneak out and pick myself up piece by piece.
Thanks, Lisa. Okay, so now I'm going to read from my new book called And Those Ashen Heaps, that Cantilevered Vase of Moonlight. And just about a week ago, someone asked me what this word meant. And I had to look it up because I had a sense of what it meant, you know. But then I looked it up in the dictionary and I was like, oh, okay, it's fine. It still works for me. No, it's totally fine. And I'll also tell you that, no, I'm happy about this. I'll tell you that, want to sit here? There's also another word that happened, you know, and I wrote this. There's a lot of, you know, peeing in our life, and there's a lot of peeing in my poems too. But I wrote them before we started translating this. But I guess anyway. But I'll read this sort of initial poem, which I wrote almost 10 years ago, and this word in the first line, again, when they did the copy edit, was like, you know, this is not a word. And I was like, no, this is a word that I got from A.M.A. Césaire in, you know, a notebook. I was like, this is a fruit in it, but it's not a word. So it's a word open to you to, it's called, it's a ceosops is the word. So this is an opening sort of nocturne, but it's a book-length poem. Rippling in the ceosops, foreskin of wind, still surrounded by blood, poverty, and the uneven caresses lying at the bottom, dreaming, days of complete idleness, urinating without rejection, transparent at 7 in the afternoon, now rising, now setting, a windbreak of gum trees, etc., the edge of time, etc. And then I thought, before I read this section that I'm going to read, I should read this, because they have the Shelley here. And I will read, so Shelley wrote this poem called A Triumph of Life at the end of his life. He didn't finish it. And I love this poem. I can't read the whole thing because it's very, very long. So I'm just going to read the end of it, and so that you can hear, there's a lot of Shelley in this particular section, and you know, sort of, but I'll tell you a little bit. The Triumph of Life is sort of, he's sitting on the side of the road and he sees this vision roll across his mind, and it's sort of death's procession, and he's just, and so it's this shape, and there's a lot of, it's a great poem. You should all read it. Let's see, where should I read it? I mean, I should just read the Shelley poem instead of my poem. But, okay. Well, you know, this one is really, okay, well, this version now I'm seeing is not the last one. Because, anyway, I'll tell you. Wow, this is a different version. Kind of cool. Okay, and others like discolored flakes of snow on fairest bosoms and the sunniest hair fell and were melted by the youthful glow, which they extinguished, and like tears they were a veil to those from whose faint lids they rained in drops of sorrow. I became aware of whence those forms proceeded, which thus stained the track in which we moved. After brief space, from every form the beauty slowly waned, from every firmest limb and fairest face the strength and freshness fell like dust and left the action and the shape without the grace of life. The marble brow of youth was cleft with care, and in those eyes where once hope shone, desire, like a lioness bereft of her last cub, glared ere it died. Each one of that great crowd sent forth incessantly these shadows, numerous as the dead leaves blown in autumn evening from a poplar tree, each like himself and each like each other were at first, but some distorted seemed to be. Obscure clouds molded by the casual air, and of this stuff the car's creative ray wrought all the busy phantoms that were there. As the sun shapes the clouds thus on the way, mask after mask fell from the countenance, and form of all, and long before the day was old, the joy which waked like heaven's glance, the sleepers in the oblivious valley died, and some grew weary of the ghastly dance, and fell as I have fallen by the wayside, these soonest from whose forms most shadows pass, and least of strength and beauty did it abide. Then what is life? I cried. So this doesn't end here. And this version, or the other version, the later one that maybe is kind of they found in the archives or something, it's the what is life is asked by a cripple who comes crawling, and it actually ends like, happy are those. So it's like he asks, then what is life? And then it's happy are the, and it's like, what are you going to say? What were you going to tell us? Like, you were going to answer this question. So I've always sort of been, I mean, it's the question, right? Anyway, Shelley. And as the procession before me fled, one seemed to know as one whose years the mask and smokeless altars interpose, incessantly numerous as the dead from whose forms shadows pass. And of that great crowd rearranged, the thrush and thrift and edelweiss, a shape whose garments in a changing seasons as yet formless against the trembling like the lifting of a veil. As in autumn time, the leaves borne onward by what through eternity echoes still in untilled fields, the soft and ceaseless song, unchilding, unfathering, unanimous. A shape all light, thoroughly half-spoken. A singing, so to speak, that passed through wood and worm before the breathless bee, and having labored timeward through remaining time, what over the bent world life must borrow, that farthest nothing, that incandescent plural of the unopened handful. There the sun lingered, and soft as wind it passes, pure moon of the doorway, pure zero in the diadems of the coffer's edge, the empty cart clattering 1 to 10, 10 to 1. All things unclose their portions in the hour of distribution, of the balancing of accounts, and those who fight for a few scraps of food to renew each day unguarded by the angels. At last, all life passes through the smiling air. Windows open noiselessly as one that in a silver vision floats, already Decembering with the aggregate of time's eternity. And life, in that black or luminous square, life lives, repeating thriftless shadow beneath the few branches galloping through night. Clear stream, wooden horse, blue sword, awaiting the few small acts of cowardice still to come. From my pure throat and the tongue close behind, I have come to trip over the woman who has given birth. Gelatinous contrapuntal, bamboozled at last, and screaming again screams of the newborn, since she was there also and keeps me from my childhood. Born, born, born. Orphan with the middle eye, with brains of the butterfly, between us plus minus scuffed tips shimmering in the circular lamp, that pell-mell night-enduring mouth. Scram, get lost, pick yourself off, you who grovel in the street, you who were born on the road to a quivering zero, profit, poor, conspiring. I apply exact numbers, the advancing sovereign spatula, and I ripen with my virginity where the void hustles to the bottom. And quivering just a little, lick my fingers, stroke the tip, and urinate in the middle and look at the stars, and quivering just a little, and lick my fingers and stroke the tip and urinate in the middle of the basin and the two dippers dipping one into the other. Remember, angels weave you. A bearded 3/4 scale redoubled on the forehead, appearing by the slow piano of her hand. 2 times 9 is 18. 3 times 9 is 27. 4 times 9 is 36. 5 times 9 is 45. 6 times 9 is 54. 7 times 9 is 63. 8 times 9 is 72. 1 plus 8 is 9. 2 plus 7 is 9. 3 plus 6 is 9. 4 plus 5 is 9. The hour arranging 4 bright columns beyond the corridor of the empty child. Someone, the 5th column, remainder of the triangle, advances like a bell in the afternoon. Do you want to hear one more section? So I usually don't read this section, but I'm going to read it today. I will just read it because you're here. It's a postscript, and it's the end. And it begins with this quote from Blake. And Blake tells us, and the angel that presided over my birth said, little creature formed of joy and mirth, go love without the help of anything on earth. I mean, isn't that devastating, right? Go love without the help of anything on earth. I open my eyes as a sunflower. The world trembles through my body, longitude, latitude. I am dancing, 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 born dancing. At last, I am here. in the thickness of 5 vertigos, the 5 in the middle, like the interior of 4 o'clock or Friday between 6 and 7 in the intones of the tamarind. Tamarind. Its green syllable unfurls my moon-like face. Beautiful in the beginning, beautiful in the middle, beautiful in the end. I close my eyes and open them again within myself. The great God with many hands churning, churning in a temple whose walls are no longer there, and there, just now, is the totality, an infinitely delicate delicateness, my birth, postponed by the punctual inquisition of the wheel, by all 4 faces of the charioteer, and yet I simply think myself up. One by one, I open the doors, confronting the empty universe for the entire duration of the counterfeit. And the wheels, my masters, endlessly generating basso umbilico, basso nada, tele pathos, passage from cadaver to corolla. The eyes of the corpse, when I open them again, pure as tiny children. I am speaking your language without actually being you. Man, child, justice, mercy. Reality is so close, and yet it is the point of no return. Reality, where the name eats the body and holds it upright. Now, where were we? Oh yes, dancing, like the procession of jewels connecting one vow to the other in the splendid firmament of time, or the brightness it veils throughout the double of myself. The white blossom on the silver bell made of tin plate and the purest rays of wind. It is 5 by all the clocks, by all of the 13 cliffs in the rectitude of its folds, and the sprig of asphodel is passing from the seller's hand. It is for you, this world, the streets, the vinegars, the farewells and the stations, and the trains coming and going with glistening windows, the train passing with fruits and flowers, with the oyster's patience. I follow the egg into its interior, into an afternoon that could have been anyone's. That's it. Thank you guys for coming. Oh, Q&A.
Yeah, so
I guess,
start Q&A. Should I get Josh?
yeah, yes.
Time for Q&A?
There might be no questions.
I have a question.
Oh,
I was
yes.
hoping you could tell us a bit about the Canary and when we can expect another issue, if we can expect another issue sometime in the future.
Oh, Josh, can we expect another issue?
You know, I don't know. Yeah, that's a good question. I don't think we knew we were going to do this one when we did it. So,
Yeah.
it's all kind of, we didn't have any books planned during the pandemic, or we pushed them back, and so the Canary was kind of a way to keep the editorial wheels rolling
Yeah.
while things were otherwise frozen. So I don't know if we'll do another. Maybe it was like 15, 12 or 15 years or something between the
Yeah, I
two.
think
So,
that's it.
yeah.
For 12.
I mean, maybe we'll do something else.
Yeah, it's very exciting.
Yeah.
We'll see. Yeah. Any other questions?
I have one for you.
Oh, yes.
Do you think that speaking a tonal language like you do has affected how you string together sounds in English? At
I'm
all?
sure. Yes, I'm sure, but probably in ways that I can't say. You know, but I always think about, because I have relationships with several languages, but I have a different distance to each one of them.
Right.
And each distance is interesting. I feel like a deep kinship for Spanish, because I feel like for me, I can sort of live in this language in a way where I can touch I can sort of inhabit, I can see the shapes of objects, but I don't know what they are. And I like that very much. But also it's the language of like some of my favorite writers. So if I sort of learn, it's like the Spanish of Vallejo, and I'm like, well, clearly that's my language. I think I deep kinship to that, and I think that the distance structures. But German too, right? German, the grammar is so weird that allows you to, and Chinese as well. I mean, Chinese I think is interesting because I know more, but I have a very childlike relationship to the language. So you'll see like the first half is bilingual English-Chinese, but what I can do in that space, the Chinese is very simple. So I have to sort of stay within a very kind of like the constraint of like a childlike language.
Well, I'm blown away that anybody can walk around speaking a tonal language and not have a stroke. From how complicated
Well,
it
there's
is.
so many people who do that. So.
I know.
Yes, Elizabeth.
I just have a question about the design of the book. The design of the book is stunning. And I know it's Wave books, and all of their books are stunning, but like what part did you have in the design of the book?
They did it exactly the way that I gave it to them.
That's awesome.
And so the first part, I can't, first part is as a projection. I mean, the whole book is a score for performance. Actually, it's open to being performed, and I have ways. I mean, I'm still sort of like working through, but it's sort of conceived like this. And the opening section is projection, and so and also it's about time. So you have to sort of move through the book. Page by page, it sort of asks you to live in the moment of reading and the page in that way. So, yeah, but I'm glad you like it.
And it's beautiful. And my other question is about mathematics. So, it's a lot of numbers in the book, and I'm just wondering what your relationship to mathematics is.
That part, well, the whole book is kind of about time.
Right.
And sort of being in the meantime of life, right in the middle, always being in the meantime of waiting for a possible redemption for human world kind. But that moment of mathematics is actually from Unica Thorn, the Man of Jasmine. There's a moment in the book where she's doing this math, but it's like a beautiful 9 is a beautiful crazy number, where it's like. It has its own magic. Yeah, so I would recommend reading The Man of Jasmine.
Oh, okay, thank you.
Any other? I can answer questions here too.
What was it like co-translating?
Oh, is it terrible? No.
Yeah, I mean, I guess that. Yeah, it was fun. It was a little bit, we each defined our own roles pretty early on, and so I think that made it, that made it like really fun. It was kind of, how to describe the process? I mean, Lynn sort of plowed through the rough waters of just getting the raw,
the first draft,
first draft done. And then it was like a lot about asking questions about like some of the philosophical things in Jung's thinking, some of his relationships, like his relationship to sort of politics and Buddhism and art, Dadaism, and other forms and people that he was interested in. So because we know Jung, we've had a lot of conversations with him. It was also kind of part of it was just us talking about Jung and like trying to figure out what angle he was coming from, and then just kind of using our ears and playing off of each other's sense of sound and materiality. Yeah, I mean, there was also a lot of, you know, practicality that was sorted through, and like, I think one of the things Lynn was talking about, her relationship with Chinese, is like, it was also, I think, difficult for her to like want to like do that work of moving something out of one language into another. So I was often kind of like the arm twister. Like, okay, we gotta do this today, and even if you just do a really quick thing, then I'll go through, and then you look at what I've done, and then you can tell me if it makes more sense than it did before. Yeah, so.
If you want to get anything done, you should collaborate with Josh, because he'll make sure that it happens. Yeah. But one thing is, I think Young is just so playful, and I'm not, I mean, I am playful, but I'm not that playful, so it's hard for me to know what, also like what game he's playing, you know, and so it's just sort of figuring out that before you can, yeah, and to convey the sort of the spirit of this person who is so good as well. Yeah, like a good person.
Yeah, like, and I've translated a book before, and I think one of the things that was important for me was to bring a sense of like knowing where you're missing something. And so like a lot of it was like me being like, yeah, but he's doing something here. We need to really go through these tones and see what the, you know, homonyms that he's playing with, homophones that he's playing with. We need to look at the characters, because I'm like, I know this, you know, because she'll just kind of gloss over it because she can comprehend it really quickly. So part of it was, yeah, those moments where you felt like something needed to be picked apart and figured out a little more closely. Yeah.
Yes. I have a question for Isa.
Yeah.
What's your favorite part of writing poems or reading poems?
Yeah, sometimes there's no answer.
Yeah. She's like a really great artist, drawer, and I think the poems, maybe it seems like you don't write poems nearly as much as you draw. You draw all the time, right? The poems has kind of been a newer thing, wouldn't you say? Maybe it's related to your art in some way? Not really? Okay. Yeah.
I like them.
Thank you.
Well, on that note, let's give the three poets a round of applause for a wonderful evening.
Thank you again for coming and for sharing this night with us.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. We have some books for sale. The poets will be signing some books over here. Everyone could help move some chairs against the wall. We'd be grateful. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, I saw you too, man. Yeah.
Well, it's up for debate right now. Either I'll be leaving in June,
Excuse me, thank you.
help at the hospital, Beverly